one of the most iconic names in music that we have ever witnessed, Kate Bush. She is a true game changer, a trailblazer, a trendsetter, an iconic figure, a woman who did everything. Your favourite female singer-songwriter of the past 30 years is 100% guaranteed 2,500,000 billion percent influenced by Kate Bush. Lorde, Fiona Apple, Tori Amos, Lana Del Rey, Marina and the Diamonds, Billie Eilish, every woman you could ever think of that is probably one of your favourite artists at the moment is definitely influenced by Kate. One of my favourite things about Kate Bush is that when you think of any artist out there, in any field of anything really, you always think about, oh, who influenced them? Who made them who they are today? Or who made them who they were in their prime? And it's really difficult to find who actually influenced Kate Bush. Like the sort of findings or the information on this, when you look for it, is very minimal. I mean, she definitely has her influences. She's mentioned, you know, David Gilmour, David Bowie, Laura Nyro, who is incredibly overlooked, I think, and a brilliant singer. So there are names that did influence Kate, but it's like very difficult to actually pinpoint what those artists shaped Kate into being, because it just feels like Kate is Kate Bush, and she is the one who did everything and is the reason why her music is the way it is. It's like she is the influencer, she is the robot that can't possibly be human. She did things that no one ever did. Even if, you know, you aren't a fan of her music, you can't deny that she broke records and changed the world for women in music, really. I mean, the first ever #1 single in the UK written by a woman is Kate Bush, Wuthering Heights, and it's like her first single as well, somehow. What a way to break on the scene, not only breaking a record like that, but just bringing out this voice that like is just so unique and hard to describe, and completely different to anything else ever. Like, where did she come up with this? Who knows? It's Kate Bush. She's whimsical, she's descriptive, she's magical, she's imaginative, she's creative. Every word you could ever think of is there for Kate Bush. God, I'm gushing over her right now. Jesus Christ. I am really giving her the praise. I hope she sees this. I hope she sees this. So of course I had to do a worst to best. And actually this was requested via Patreon. So if you are interested in getting your own videos like this requested, and many other kinds of other videos too, you should definitely look at my Patreon. There is a lot of exciting things that you can access if you donate to me through that. If you just want to support me as well. These videos take a lot of time, and I work pretty hard on them, I think, I hope. So, you know, if you feel generous, definitely look at that. And you can get some videos like this too. So it had to be done. And I'm appreciative of this being a request through Patreon, because damn, Kate needs this. She needs a video like this. So let's get into it then before I ramble on even longer. We have 9 albums to get through. I'm not looking at director's cut because 1, I've actually never heard it, and 2, I have no interest in listening to it, and 3, I think with it being just re-recordings of other songs, it just feels a bit weird to include it in a list like this. All the songs already existed before she made the album. It's interesting that she took the approach, and I will get into a few reasons throughout this video as to why she did it. And you know, they are worthwhile bringing up, these reasons, but it just doesn't really feel like a studio album. I think re-recording your songs, I just don't know if it counts as one. I think it technically is one, but I just don't feel like it counts. I don't know why, but anyway, if you are mad that if I didn't include it, if you are mad at me for not including this, you can tell me in the comments, but you can see why I've left it off. So anyway, we are going for the top 9, the 9 albums ranked worst to best, starting with If you're surprised that this is here at the bottom of the list, I would be surprised at you, unless you had a very good reason as to why this should be higher, that I'd be interested in hearing. But I think most Kate Bush fans agree on this. Like, I think most, right? It does have Rubber Band Girl, and I do think this is actually a really fun tune and a bit underrated in her larger discography. I don't think people bring this one up at all, really. But it reminds me of like some like new wave post-punk bands, a bit like Talking Heads. I don't know why it reminds me of that actually, but I think she cited David Byrne as an influence before, so it kind of makes sense. But yeah, this one, the title track, I really like as well. But aside from that, man, this album just feels incredibly dated. It feels actually more like late in the 80s than it does a 90s album. It just sounds very of its time, but even a bit older than the time it came out. You've got tracks like Eat the Music, which just aren't very well written lyrically, which is a very rare thing to say about any Kate Bush song, because her writing is always top notch. But, you know, you've got Constellation of the Heart, which just feels, again, sounding a bit old and crusty and rusty at this point. Moments of Pleasure doesn't really go head to head with any of her other like ballad type tracks, which she can be really good at writing. I just think this one just sounds a bit standard, a bit plain for me. And then Big Stripey Lie, which I think is honestly her worst song. Like, again, ignoring director's cut, I think this actually might be the worst song she's ever made. Production on this is so rough. Oh my god, it just sounds really grim and ugly, and I just don't know where she came out with this, to be honest. But yeah, I don't know, I just think this is quite easily her worst. The one album of hers that I would just say is mediocre, to be honest. Her other albums I would always at least say are all at least good. They're all at least good. But this one I just don't think crosses that boundary. And I don't know, obviously I wasn't born in 1993, I was non-existent in this year, but if I was alive and I was a Kate Bush fan and she gave us this and then had to wait 12 years for a new album, 12 years, I'd be so bummed out. Imagine getting this and just no more music for 12 years. This, you left your fans with this? Come on, Kate. Why? One thing about Lionheart that I think surprises me is that this is the follow-up album to The Kick Inside. Obviously, I'm going to talk about The Kick Inside at some point, because it's obviously higher than this one. But I won't spoil too much. But something about The Kick Inside just feels so wonderfully made. And then you drop this album the same year and it just completely falls by comparison. It's just really weird to me. Although it's technically not too weird when you read the backstory of this and how the record label, obviously, it's always a friggin' record label, really rushed her into making a new album because of how successful the debut was. I mean, come on. You can kind of see why. You had tracks like Wuthering Heights, which completely, like, you know, changed music history by having a female write a song that went straight to number one. Like, it's obvious, you can see why the record label would be so eager for them to make another album. But as well as that, it's actually kind of interesting as well how most of these tracks were recorded before The Kick Inside. And you can actually hear that. Like, this sounds more like a debut album. This sounds more like someone who is new to music and they're just kind of working things out. They're not quite there yet. And then The Kick Inside is the album that they dropped later in their career because it just sounds so perfectly made. It just has fewer striking moments. The vocals are nowhere near as impressive as so many of the songs she's made throughout her career, and she has a very distinct vocal tone too. And yeah, on some of these tracks she actually just sounds very ordinary, but that's not to say there's no good tracks though. There are some really good ones on here. Of course, it was birthed out the same sort of creative process as The Kick Inside, So of course you've got tracks like Wow, where the chorus is just a rush of like blood to the head. It's just a really brilliant like swelling of instrumentation that comes together. It's such a good track. This is one of my favorite Kate songs actually. You've got Don't Push Your Foot on the Heartbreak, which is a track that has more urgency to it. I think this track has a really great instrumental. And then the final two tracks are really good as well. There's way more of a quirk to these ones, which again are way more reminiscent of the best of what Kate has had to offer throughout her career. Hammer Horror as well is just such a jaunty, wonky, weird track. I can't work out what is going on with this one, but it is really good. And it's a shame that she saves these two right until the end, because I think more of the album should have just sounded like this. I mean, for me, I just don't really care that much about In Search of Peter Pan. It's just too airy, too thin, very low impact, and there's quite a few tracks like this on the album. They're nice on the ears, but I think she just doesn't explore the best of her abilities with this album. So yeah, it's okay overall, but I think it's fair to rank it down here at 8. Compared to the other albums, I think it's fair to have it here. 50 Words for Snow is the most recent album that we've had from Kate Bush, and by recent, it is 10 years old at this point. Not entirely sure if we're ever going to get anything else from Kate ever again. I think there's a good, strong chance that we won't. I mean, I think there's a very strong chance that we won't, to be honest. I think there's a very strong chance we won't, but to end your career on an album like this is pretty admirable. I think the very tender moments on tracks like Snowflake are absolutely beautiful. A very icy atmosphere that she conjures up on some of these tracks too, of course, fitting the snow theme quite nicely. Misty is like a 10-minute track that builds incredibly well. It starts pretty ordinary sounding, but once you get towards the end, it ends up having a bit of a stomp to it that reminds me of something like Fiona Apple would have done in her later albums actually. And then of course you've got the title track where she obviously lists 50 words for snow, and by God does she try her hardest to list out 50 words for snow. It hits the point honestly where I'm just like, you're stretching out the meaning of snow on some of these tracks. What is it she says? Crusting shovel, or shovel crusting, I think she says. You sneaky girl, you're just making things up. But you know, it's not a bad track. I think the idea of it is way better than it ends up being executed, to be honest. Just listening to someone list out 50 words isn't the most exciting thing in the world, I'm not going to lie, but I like that she made a track like this. No one else would ever make a song like this. And I do kind of find the moments as well where she's like, come on man, you've got 42 words to go, get on with it. I do find that kind of funny as well. So yeah, it's a solid album with some really interesting ideas and sticks nicely to the snow theme. It's very committed to that theme. And I think only Kate would make this album. And only Kate would make an album like this late in her career. You don't have those extra quirks coming through with her voice. Obviously, she was, I don't know how old she was when she made this album, 50 something maybe bordering 60s. I'm not entirely sure how old she is at this point now, actually. But anyway, she can't do those vocal things that she was able to do back in 1978. So I think, again, if we get another album from her in the future, it might border on sounding like this again, although I guess we can't really know for sure. But you know what I mean, it's still a pretty good album to end your career on. Probably surprising for some people that this is ranking here, although I guess when you think about the albums that are coming after it, it might not be as surprising, to be honest, but depends on your tastes, perhaps. But The Sensual World, I think there's another album which I'll get to in her discography that is actually more sensual than the album that's titled The Sensual World, which I find incredibly ironic. This album is decent and obviously better than the ones I've mentioned previously, but I can't help but feel like there's something not quite there with this album. I think the opening track is brilliant. Yes. is just really perfectly encapsulating that feeling that she's able to do. She conjures up such a great way of, you know, presenting feelings and emotions in music, and this track does that very, very well. Love and Anger is great as well, one of my favorite Kate Bush songs, I'm not gonna lie. The bite to it is really good. The chorus kicks in and it's great. Heads We're Dancing is a very smart song about how you can just not see past the love you have for someone, and then when you finally find out who they really are, he was Hitler, it was Adolf, it's Adolf, then you realize they're not the person that they seem to be. I think that's a really clever arc for a song. But some of these tracks for me, man, are just a bit okay sounding, like there's just not a whole lot going on. I think she did want to present this album a bit more of like a oh, this is my vocals here, my vocals are this woman's work. Obviously is beautifully performed, but I can't really, like, when I listen to that song, I don't think to myself, I really want to listen to that again. And there's a few tracks on this album like that where I'm like, I could leave these behind. I don't really know if I want to go back to them. Rocket's Tale is a bit out of place as well, actually. Like, the heavy electric guitar that comes through doesn't fit the album's aesthetic at all. It sounds very inspired by rock of that era. It's a very like 80s rock tune, but does it fit on this album? I'm not sure it does. A Deeper Understanding, really interesting lyrical concept, but again, musically, I'm not enamored with this. So overall, it's just a decent album, and I don't think it actually is as sensual as it should be. It should be more sensual. The Dreaming, on the other hand, though, whoa, this is a bold move. This is a bold move. Like, going in this direction, man, at this point in her career is kind of insane. This is like the most experimental she ever gets. I mean, comparing it to the previous albums that came out, and then you've got tracks like Get Out of My House on here, and it's just like, wow. She went insane. Leave It Open has the creepy as hell vocals that I can't quite fathom, but only Kate would do this. Again, this is just such a Kate Bush album, just completely subverting every expectation anyone would have had for her at the time, to the point where people just didn't like this album at all. This was very much panned by critics, and I think, to be fair, it's pretty safe to say that over time people have become more accustomed to it. I think more people nowadays view it as one of her best albums. It's easy to see why. The charging opener of Sat in Your Lap is brilliant. I just think this is one of her best songs. I think some of the lines as well are really funny, where she's like, could have been a lawyer, but, you know, I just couldn't be bothered. There Goes a Tenor with the really odd, off-kilter, quirky beat, and the Cockney accent that comes through on this track is just brilliant. Like, she definitely should have done more songs with an accent that comes through like this. I feel like it's such a missed opportunity. Suspended in Gaffer just feels like a point where she's like improvising her vocals, to the point where it doesn't really feel like she you know, she planned some of it. It just kind of comes out and it sounds great. Love this song. Love this song. You've got the daunting feeling of The Dreaming, which I think I appreciate how it sounds more than I actively like it. I think I feel the same about Houdini as well. These are tracks on this album where I just appreciate that she went in this direction more than I actively enjoy the music, which I think is quite interesting. But the great moments are so great. And like I say, Get Out of My House, Jesus Christ, Winnie the Pooh on acid here conjures up a great tone, a very interesting way of depicting like mental health as well. This song was very ahead of its time, like, to just create this really weird track that depicts something so serious in the way that it does. Again, 1982 this, like, I don't think many other artists would have quite been able to achieve this. So yeah, a very good album. I think it's the first album on this list that I personally think is just genuinely very good. The others before it were decent, but this is the one where I think her discography really starts coming into its own, because again, no one else would make an album like this. The debut album, The Kick Inside, which does not sound like a debut. This sounds like an artist who was well into their career who would make an album like this. Wonderful, wonderful stuff on this one. The Baroque pop is to die for here. The vocals are like no other. The immediate elegance that is dripping on the opening track, the saxophone that comes in on the saxophone song is beautiful. The tenderness of Feel It, the quirkiness of Kite. Love this track, that buoyant beat. Oh my god, what a fun song, one of her quirkiest songs ever, and I think it's actually one of her best songs ever too. Wuthering Heights, is there anything I can even say about this one? Jesus Christ. The sublime closing track too, just a beautiful album, and for preparation for this video, it just grew on me even more. I went back to it and then played some of the tracks again, going back to it, and I was just like, man, this album is brilliant. What a debut album. This is definitely one of her best albums, and I think it's fantastic. Also, if we're having a conversation about the best, like the best debut albums ever made, this is in the top 10. Like, this is definitely in the top 10. Up there with some of the best albums that, you know, were the debuts of any artist's career. Like, this goes head to head with anyone. It's brilliant. Number 3 now. You are surprised to see this here, aren't you? This is very much ranking at number 1 for every person that likes Kate Bush. I think it's mostly ranked as the best by Kate Bush. It's regarded as one of the best albums ever. Not even just by Kate Bush, but ever. And you can see why. I mean, honestly, if you think about this album, there are like 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 songs that you could just look at and think, these are some of the best songs ever made. Like, ever made. And those songs are pretty obvious. I think Running Up That Hill, obviously. What can I say about that song? Cloudbusting, I think you could say about Cloudbusting as well. Brilliant. The Big Sky, I think you could claim it. The Big Sky definitely could be up there. And then any other tracks on the album, I think you could pick and choose from that point and then say those are some of the best songs ever made, which is just why this album is so fantastic. I think for me though, just to get a few of the negatives out of the way, the minor negatives, the very niggly negatives, is why it doesn't rank higher. It's just because I don't necessarily think tracks like, you know, Mother Stands for Comfort, they're not as like impactful, they're not as big as some of the bigger moments for me, and Dream of Sheep as well. Not bad songs, they're just very soft and they could do with more oomph. And I think this is for me where some tracks throughout Kate's career actually could do with a bit more oomph. Like, she's a brilliant singer, she's a brilliant writer, but sometimes her tracks just end up sounding a bit plain and ordinary. And I think if they just had a bit more of a swell to them, a bit more of that quirkiness that she's known for, tracks like this I think would just be better. But they're only minor negatives that I just wanted to mention, because I know some people would probably be in the comment section saying, how do you rank this lower? So I thought I'd just give that mini explanation there. But yeah, of course, the title track is great. Oh, Running Up That Hill, I just can't get over this song. It sounds eternal. It sounds like a dream. It just sounds so effortless and just perfect. I can't believe she made this song. How did anyone make a song like this? How? You've got The Big Sky, which is incredibly optimistic. The euphoria that drips out of this song is just wonderful. Wow, this song is just brilliant. Cloudbusting as well. Love how specific the lyrical theme is to this one. Again, who else would make this? Waking the Witch, oh my days, is just so intense, so sharp. It actually reminds me of The Dreaming. I think she probably pulled a bit of that imagination out of The Dreaming for this track, because it just reminds me of a few of the tracks that would fit onto The Dreaming. And sorry, this would fit onto The Dreaming is what I was meant to say there. But yeah, brilliant. I think the theme of the last half of the album, because of course it's split into 2 sections, The Ninth Wave is really interesting as well. I think the way it all ties together is brilliant too, with the final track, The Morning Fog. We've got Hello Earth coming before it, which is very disconnected with a drawn track. That's essentially her accepting her fate, her death, out at sea. And then The Morning Fog comes in, where she kind of just comes back to life. You know, she's sort of seen the end, but then she's perhaps saved by someone or woken up by someone. Although there are some theories actually that she actually dies and this is just the afterlife, this track. But I'm pretty sure Kate herself has said that that's not true and it is her waking up and she survives. Beautiful, uplifting track, this one though. Like, I love how you could take it out as context and it could just sound like a really beautiful song about how someone just is so appreciative of life and the people around them, the way she's just talking about how she wants to tell her brothers, her mother, her father, how much she loves them. Like, I just think that's just a perfect end to this album. And again, tracks like Watching You Without Me, one of her most underrated songs. I love this one. The melody is just so unique. The unsung hero of her discography, honestly, and the way it kind of like goes a bit warped as well towards the end with the vocals. It's really creative. I just can't get over this song. I can't quite put it into words as well, what makes it so good. But I just think it's so overlooked when you look at how famous so many of her other songs are. But this for me is one of her best songs. You've got Jig of Life, which has just such an Irish influence coming through. Ed Sheeran Could Never with Galway Girl. A great album. You know it's a great album, you've definitely heard it. Even if you've never heard any of the Kate Bush album, you've 100% heard this album, because this album has just been hailed and praised to high end for years now, and I think you've probably heard it, and the curiosity will have got the best of you at some point if you're a music fan. But yeah, somehow two more rank higher than this, and I'm sure many people won't agree. Okay, throughout this worst to best, I've mentioned a few times about how she's got some really underrated and overlooked songs in her discography. But if we're talking about underrated albums and overlooked albums, this is the most overlooked album in her discography. Her most underrated album in her discography, easily. I love Aerial Man. I think it doesn't get the props it deserves, perhaps because it's a bit lengthy, and perhaps because it isn't the most distinct or bold album of her discography. But I think the atmosphere it conjures up is beautiful. This is what I'm looking for when I think Kate goes slower and she goes a bit more into the piano direction tracks, because this album conjures up such a great, like, sunsetty atmosphere in ways that so many of her other songs never really were able to do. Coming 12 years after the Red Shoes as well, just a complete change of direction, change in pace, for reasons I don't quite know, honestly. Like, I don't know what really compelled her to do this, because it's just such a different album for her, but I think it's just so beautifully made. King of the Mountain, really good track, really great opener. You've got tracks like Pie, where she's literally just reeling off pi, you know, the 3-point blah 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 pi number, that pi. She's not talking about pies, but the pi number, and it sounds beautiful. Like, it sounds absolutely earthly and just natural and organic, and it reminds me of some like early like 90s down tempo, which I think is probably one of the biggest influences for this album. And I'm not quite sure again why she chose that direction, because again, nothing else in her discography did that. It's a very long album that's split into two sections, never tires out. We're talking like an hour and 20 minutes, and I don't think a moment is wasted on this one. You've got the run as well, of Sunset to Aerial Tal to somewhere in between. That 3-track run, one of her best 3-track runs I think in her whole career. I'm going to go as far as saying that. I think this track run is stunning, absolutely stunning. These tracks are beautiful, the bird chirping that comes through as well. You've got it back on the final track, which I think is a pretty nice touch for the closer of the album, Aerial, the title track. And yeah, she just sounds so appreciative of life and just wants to take those tender feelings and just pour it into the music, those natural, again, like bird sounds and things like that, into the music. and she just sounds so loving of that, and I think it comes through so wonderfully on this album, and that's why I think it's her second best. So hopefully my explanation, my gushing over this album convinced you of why it should be at number 2, because I know this probably wouldn't rank that highly for many people. And I'm not trying to be different. I'm not trying to be like, you know, I'm not like the other girls. Oh my god, I like tattoos, like that kind of shit. I just wanted to express my love for this album, and I do genuinely mean that this is number 2. I'm not just trying to, you know, be cool and different. I don't do that kind of thing. This is her second best album for me. And her best album for me is Never Forever. This right here is the best marriage of quirkiness and softness and beautifulness, if that's even a word, that she's ever done. She's got the slower tracks on this album. She's got the incredibly bombastic, in-your-face, quirky tracks. And it's just the best combination of those worlds coming together in Kate's career. It's the best that she's ever been able to do, which is up for debate. I know you're probably thinking, no, actually this album does it better. Fair enough, that's okay. But for me, Never Forever is the one. Her third album, and her best album for me. This album has easily the best like ratio of her best songs, I think. Babushka, friggin' Violin, The Wedding List, Dreaming, Army Dreamers. Like, there's so many tracks on this list that would make it in my top 20 best Kate Bush songs. Something so incredibly satisfying about saying the word babushka. Babushka, just say that word, babushka, babushka. It just sounds so good. Where did she come up with this? How did she make it into a song? Only Kate Bush could do it, because she is just a magical human being. Blow Away has the beautiful Baroque pop elements of The Kick Inside. Obviously, it only came 2 years after that album, so they're still lingering. You've got All We Ever Look For, an absolutely delicate track that I think is beautiful as well. The vocals on this one actually remind me of Joanna Newsom, and that's another name drop that you could say is very obviously inspired by Kate Bush, because Joanna Newsom definitely is with the vocals in places. Listen to this track and then listen to any given Joanna track, and there's quite a eerie similarity. Classic quirk of The Wedding List, just such a great track in the way it's written. Love the lyrics on this one. Violin is just so manic and ridiculous, and I think it's brilliant. I do realise I misspoke a minute ago as well. I think I got too carried away and I said dreaming instead of breathing. It is of course breathing that I'm talking about, not dreaming. The closing track, stunning closing track. Oh my god, the vocals are to die for. This is one of her best vocal performances in my opinion. Beautiful. The BBC had a 68 song list, would you believe, of tracks that were not allowed to play on the radio during the Gulf War, and one of them was Army Dreamers by Kate Bush, would you believe? Yes, that is true. They had 68 songs that were not allowed to play during the Gulf War. How random. But of course, this track is incredibly potent, and dare I say one of her most political songs? I don't know if that's the right word, but she's very eagerly bashing the idea of, you know, joining the army, going to war, because of how it sucks the potential out of people. You know, could have been anybody. You could have been so successful, but unfortunately you couldn't be because you were killed during battle. I think it's a very, very daring track, and I'm going to say it, this is my favourite Kate Bush song as well. Mostly, to be honest, for how bold it is, as I've already said, but the harp as well. The harp on this track creates such a brilliant melody. Oh my god. Oh, it sounds so good. Pretty confident it's a harp anyway. I'm pretty sure it is. I could be wrong about that, so correct me again if I am wrong. There may be some things I've gotten wrong throughout this video, and I am very sorry if I have. I think I'm just so eager to talk about this artist that I'm just a bit... But yes, this is my favourite Kate Bush album. Never Forever. Oh, just so good. So good. What an album. And what an artist. You know, her discography is brilliant. And maybe I've been a bit harsh on some of her albums, but it doesn't take away from the fact that, well, firstly, nearly every album has at least 2 or 3 great tracks, regardless of the quality of the whole album. But secondly, how amazing she is as an artist. I mean, there's just something for everyone in her discography. If you want to go slow, if you want to go for moody, if you want to go for atmospheric, you could pick 50 Words for Snow. If you want to go a bit in your face, a bit more bombastic and bonkers, you can go for The Dreaming. You could also take both of the soft and the bombastic and go for Never Forever. You can go for something a bit more pop focused in places as well, with Hounds of Love. And by pop, I mean some of the best pop songs ever made. Like, there's just something for everyone. And she is just such a great artist, a one of a kind, and she will live on forever. Kate Bush, worst to best. This has been my ranking. So thank you for watching as always. If you have anything to say, let me know in the comments. If you have any gripes with my list, tell me as well. Thank you for watching, or tell me if you just like my list, that would be great too. If you agree with me as well, that would be great. Thank you for watching as always. This has been fun to record, so I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Let me know what I should do next. Look at my Patreon, as I said, and have a good day. Subscribe if you have not already. Goodbye.